Okay, Friddy, thank you so much for being here and being a guest on our podcast today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, excited to have you and excited for the listeners or future listeners to learn from you and hear what you're seeing in the market and what you do best. So let's dive in. What started you in the recruiting side of things? Because you started off your career in supply chain before moving into recruiting. So what inspired that transition?
Yeah, so like you said, I started in supply chain. I started with a large Fortune 500 organization in a global rotational program in supply chain. Ended up becoming a commodity manager, then a supply chain manager. And especially during my last job search, I realized that a lot of the recruiters I was working with really didn't understand supply chain, didn't know really what I was talking about, and really felt like that there was a gap there. And then, funny enough, my wife, who also worked in supply chain, became a supply chain recruiter and really saw the value firsthand in having that supply chain background when working on supply chain roles. So she joined a niche boutique recruiting firm that was focused on supply chain, but she was the only one there who had that hands-on experience. So about 7 or 8 years ago, we said, "Hey, there's really a niche and a market there that for a boutique firm that doesn't just specialize in supply chain, but actually speaks the language, knows what it takes to work in those roles, and really has that firsthand experience." So about 8 years ago, we started Scope Recruiting with that idea that all of our recruiters, and that's true to this day, we teach them the recruiting side of the business, not the supply chain side. We hire folks out of supply chain careers, and then we teach them how to recruit instead of the other way and hiring recruiters, right, and trying to teach them the nuances in supply chain.
Hmm, gotcha. Gotcha. Okay. And what when you're placing for specific roles, who's your typical client, your typical candidate?
Yeah, I think our typical client is within manufacturing, but we do work across all industries. But I would say manufacturing probably makes up 50% of the industries we work on. And then the most common roles there are commodity managers, supply chain managers, procurement director. So that mid to director level is the most common ones. But we really go the full spectrum end to end from entry level roles all the way to chief procurement officers, VPs. And so we really cover the full spectrum within supply chain.
Okay, perfect. Perfect. Let's talk about some common, questions that executives reach out to me about. And for the first one, let's talk about when executives in supply chain or operations begin exploring new opportunities. What are some common mistakes you see them make?
Yeah, I have a couple. And I think one of the most common mistakes is to share too much advice too early on in the process, right? So let's say we've started the interview process. We're talking to the hiring team, and they share what their struggles are, what some of the projects are they have upcoming, and we've actually had that happen a couple of times where candidates were almost dismissive and said, "Yeah, I've seen this. There's no problem. We can solve this within the first couple of months," without really taking the time to learn the underlying circumstances and really what makes maybe the company unique and the challenges unique. And that's something, yeah, like I said, we've seen quite a bit is where strong candidates just try to share too much advice and too much um, knowledge too early and make it look like the challenges the company faces aren't severe or aren't yeah, impactful. So that's something we have seen and actually has extended to past the hiring process in during the onboarding phase, where I've talked to an executive later on and he told me, right, Freddie, nobody likes to be told their baby's ugly. So taking the time
Yeah.
taking the time to really understand a company and kind of, right, not trying to fix too much stuff too early. And that's right, that's true during the interview process as well as during the first 6 months, 12 months of taking on a new role. Is like, right, and it depends on the role as well. Are we working with large organizations? Are we working directly with a founder? And is it a growing company, right? So adjusting the process to the role, to the company, and what's required there. But yeah, I think having the sensitivity of understanding, okay, where can I push sooner? Where do we have to maybe wait a little bit before we can push the issue? And where do I actually have to sit down and learn and observe first before offering any advice?
Interesting. Yeah, it kind of seems like almost a common thread I'm starting to see is kind of overconfidence, where it's, hey, you don't know the company exactly. You might be able to fix a similar problem or you fix similar problems, but don't like I like that quote. Nobody likes to hear that their baby's ugly, right? And
Yeah.
so kind of don't oversell yourself and make sure that you're realizing there's going to be some nuances that you have to get used to. And you can't change everything in the organization because that probably scares the company and scares them away from you, right?
Yeah, and it feels them right. Like if it was so easy, we could have fixed it ourselves, right? That's kind of the response, the opposite response you get, right? So
Mhm.
there's typically something else there why they haven't fixed it.
Right. Right. That makes sense. That makes sense. And to kind of shift gears a little bit, but what misconceptions do executives have about how recruiters in your niche operate?
Yeah, I think a lot of times executives think recruiters are like career coaches or job matchers, and that is true to some extent with larger recruiting firms that have thousands of jobs, right? But especially with boutique niche recruiting firms, it's kind of the opposite. We get hired by our clients to find niche talent, and the chances are of you sending us your resume and that we have anything that's a good fit are fairly low because, right, we have location requirements, we have different industries, we have different seniority levels. So chances are that we don't have the right job for you right away. And I think that's something that a lot of people in general, candidates, have a misconception about how recruiters work, right? That I can send them my resume and now you help me find a position. And that's just not what niche and boutique recruiting firms do just because we don't have the volume, right? We can't just go to a company and say, hey, we saw your job postings, we have a great candidate. Are you interested in hiring him? Right? That's unfortunately not how it works.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's a really common misconception. I mean, I've talked to executives. I mean, I talk to them all day, every day, just like I'm sure you talk to clients and candidates all day, every day. And it's a really common misconception of people going to recruiters and saying, hey, find me a job. When in all reality, that's not the recruiter's job, right? The
Yeah.
job is to fill a position and you might be a good fit, you might not. I don't know if you agree with this, but it kind of how it seems to me is having a conversation never hurts, and it might lead to a placement further on, but it doesn't mean a recruiter's gonna, bend over backwards and do everything they can to place you right then, because it just might not be good timing for that recruiter and what they have.
Yeah, and I think you're exactly right, right? Establishing that relationship and having a two-way streak, right? If you're looking for a role, if you want to maximize your relationship you have with a recruiter, being responsive and offering value to a recruiter as well, right? So if you reach out to a recruiter, the recruiter might not have anything, but if you can help out the recruiter with maybe in your network, you can tell them, hey, I saw you have a supply chain manager role here. Now know somebody in my network that can be helpful, or right, and establishing that relationship past just, hey, do you have something for me right now? I think is a really good way of growing that and kind of avoiding that misconception, but also incentivizing the recruiters. Like, okay, I have somebody here that I know. I've worked with him. He has shared his network with me as a resource. I'm gonna go the extra step and see if I can help that person out, right? Versus just getting an email with a resume and saying, hey, what do you have for me, right? On the flip side, it happens a lot of times where we send out messages to executive level candidates, we never hear a response, and then 6 months later they respond and say, hey, by the way, I'm looking for a new role. I'm like, well, you didn't bother to respond to me when I reached out to you. What incentive do I have now to respond to you when you need something, right?
Right. It's honestly what I see a lot with networking just in general, right? A lot of people they only network when they need something. And then you're just asking and asking and asking instead of always being willing to have conversations because you never know when that'll pay off for you or for the other person. And I mean, a big reason why we started this podcast is somebody that I know that's great at networking. His name's Sean Finnegan, and his biggest thing is, make connections because it's going to help everybody out in the end, you know?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I'm curious, shifting gears. I'm going to shift gears on you a lot in this podcast. I got a lot of different questions for you. I think you've got a lot of expertise in this area. And so what is one of the best ways that executives can highlight career achievements if they're trying to switch sectors or industries? Or better said, do you have any advice for somebody that's looking to switch industries?
Yeah, honestly, I don't think it's any different than highlighting any other skill you have. It's always good if you can talk about it, but having real life examples of where you have done it and successfully done it, I think is always the best way to prove it. Even if you have been within the same organization for a very long time, but maybe you have worked on different products, on different projects that weren't necessarily super closely related, right? If you have any of those real life experiences where you have come out of your comfort zone and learned something new and shifted gears and maybe adopted new systems, new processes, new technology, anything you can highlight where you have had that flexibility and that skill to shift from a point A to point B, I think is always helpful and much better than generally talking about, hey, I'm interested and yeah, I would love to do this, right? Having with any skill, having examples, data, and specifics to back it up is always the best way to go.
Yeah. Yeah. I do you see a lot of people that are trying to switch to different sectors? Do you deal with that a lot with candidates that you try to place? Or do you typically like to place them from same industry in the same industry because that's just the typical route to take?
A lot of times that's the requirement our clients and partners have, right? A lot of times they say we want somebody with a specific industry background. Sometimes we advise our clients against it. Let's say, right, there's certainly industries within supply chain that are less developed than others, right? Automotive is probably the most developed supply chain you can get, but it's a very limited amount of parts you're dealing with, high volume. So it's a unique case. But then on the flip side, you have construction, and within construction, a lot of times the engineers and the project managers are still running supply chain, and supply chain is purely tactical. So if you're looking to hire supply chain within construction, right, it might be beneficial to go to other industries where supply chain has become more strategic and is more advanced, so you can transfer those processes into your organization instead of trying to find somebody with that construction background because it's just been treated very tactical and still is to this day and within certain industries.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's interesting because I think a lot of executives, not to put them all into one bubble, but a lot of executives that I speak with, it's common to have the misconception of, well, I have the skill sets for this other industry, but the good thing to remember is the recruiter lots of times is told, hey, we will not recruit. We will not hire anybody out of this industry. This is exactly what we need. This is exactly what we want. Even if you might think something's better, you have to accommodate to the client, right?
But in the end, that's our job, right? And we advise, and during the beginning stages of a process, we typically share our market feedback and say, hey, it might be good to be open to other relevant industries. But in the end, if our clients say, hey, no, this is what we want and what we need, I think that's in the end, it's our job to find them the candidate they're looking for, right? And sending them over candidates that don't fit their profile in the end is just a mark against us because it makes us look like we don't understand what they want and what they need.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree with it. I love talking about it, and I'm going to shift gears on you again. So talking about executives looking to make a change, what's one piece of advice you'd give an executive that's looking to get into that job search today?
Besides networking, which I think is the most important part, and we've already talked about, I think is really representing who you are on your LinkedIn, on your resume, right? Because at executive level, it's not just about skills and experience. It's also about leadership styles, culture fit, vision. And so some of those are hard to express on a resume, right? So having a coherent personal brand on your LinkedIn, on your social media profiles that kind of represent on your leadership style, your style of working, your style to approach challenges and projects, I think creates a full picture that makes it easier for recruiters in-house or external to find you and kind of get an idea of, okay, who am I working with here, and is it worth reaching out to that person? So yeah, I think, right, make sure that when you update your resume and your LinkedIn, it kind of reflects on who you are and how you work.
I love that. I love that because that's exactly what we do, right? I mean, that's music to my ears. But I totally agree. And I want to emphasize what you said as well, so that doesn't get dropped, is networking is huge. And that's, if we hadn't have already talked about that, it seems like that would have been a real driving, hey, this is what you need to do.
Networking is huge. Networking will get you the best results. I think over anything else, networking, if you get to a point where you never have to apply or never rely on a recruiter or never might have to update your resume, and we've seen that, right?
Mhm.
The very most successful and top candidates, a lot of times, right? They haven't updated their resume in 20 years, and they don't have to, because the network is is can be everything.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I speak almost every week, at least a couple times a week. I talk to somebody that says, hey, I've gone my entire career, last 30 years, without even touching my resume. And then it's either I'm retiring or I have nobody else to tap into and I've stopped networking, right? But if they kept
Yeah,
networking, kept pushing on that, they might not need it ever, right? Which is,
yeah.
something I don't usually say, right? But it's true. I think networking is huge, and I wanted to underline that because I liked that you said that at the beginning. So let's talk about something that I know that you are passionate about, and it's kind of the interview process to hire new candidates and it being broken. Why do you think it's broken, and what do you think is a good way to fix it if you have something in mind?
Yeah, I think the number one reason why hiring doesn't work out is because there is a misalignment internally before the hiring process gets started. There might be different requirements across the leadership board, where they say the VP says the logistics portion of the supply chain role is the most important to me. The director says, no, I really need somebody who lead the procurement side, and a third party believes it's the demand planning side that needs fixing. So I think that's number one, is there's a misalignment internally, and what do we really want? And then two, it's the job description, right? And that's something we never take our client's job description, because we want to make sure, okay, what are some of the projects that this person has to tackle? What does success look like the first 6 months, the first 12 months, to really have a very clear picture of who do we really want for this role, create alignment within the organization, make sure that everybody interviews for the same skills and experience, right? It's no good if one person interviews for one set of skills and the next person interviews for another set of skills, and in the end somebody says he was perfect and the other person says no, she didn't know what she was talking about. So I think that's number one reason why hiring is broken, is not enough thought is being put in upfront on what do we need, where do we want to go with this, and then make sure everybody involved in the hiring process is on board with it, and we're all interviewing and ranking candidates and evaluating candidates against the same set of expectations.
Mhm.
And I
Yeah.
think, yeah, creating that upfront, and that's something we help with quite a bit, is just it makes the hiring process go so much smoother.
Yeah. It's like knowing where you're going to run before you actually start running so that you don't end up doing circles. Right?
Yeah.
Right. That's what it sounds like to me. And it's funny how usually any question I ask on this podcast, or common mistakes, things with the clients or the candidates, usually it sounds so simple, but in all reality it's, hey, make sure you are all on the same page so you have the same grading scale, right? So you
Yeah.
can actually find the right candidate.
Yeah, it sounds simple, but unfortunately, right, it's just hiring a lot of times feels like an afterthought, right? Especially the higher up you go, there's always something more important going on. There's always something more urgent. So taking the time and sitting together with the team and saying, okay, what do we need? What do we want? How do we get it? And how do we go about it? Right? It's just, yeah, like I said, it sounds simple, but it's just a question of priority a lot of times. And I think just unfortunately that priority isn't always there, which is leads to a lot of companies having to go to recruiters and say, hey, we can't find the right candidate. Can you help us? And similar to you, right? I think if companies would embrace that more often, they would require help from external recruiters much less.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I agree. It's a really interesting topic and it sounds simple, but there are so many intricacies and so many different personalities that have to come in alignment in a company to get it. And so I'm happy you talked about that. I'm happy that we were able to address that. And I'd love to talk about the best way for somebody to reach out to your company. Maybe it's a potential client for you. Maybe it's a candidate that just wants to follow Scope Recruiting and know what's going on with you guys. What's the best way for somebody to find out more?
Yeah, visit us on our website, scoperecruiting.com. My LinkedIn profile as well. If you Google Friddy, there aren't too many out there. So if you put it in LinkedIn, just Friddy, you will find me.
Yeah.
Otherwise, Scope Recruiting. We do have a podcast as well where we talk more about supply chain trends, industry trends, hiring trends within supply chain. So feel free to follow that as well.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Freddie. Thank you for being a great guest, and hopefully we'll have you on again.
Thank you. Have a good one.